Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the July 13th edition of Durham's Community Safety and Wellness Task Force. I'm Xavier Casey, one of the co-chairs. And just to set the stage for tonight's meeting, we have a very limited but deep agenda today. We have three items. We want to consider the possible reconstruction of our roundtables. We want to consider a timeline for recommendations. And we want to talk about bringing more community voices into this Wednesday 6 o'clock space that we call our task force meetings. We are going to use this meeting as a work session. We've said that before, but it really ended up sounding like lectures. We're going to just talk this out. We don't have a lot of things set in place because we want that to be the result of our time together. So want to have be a lot more interactive than we normally are. And we appreciate all the expertise that's around this table and all the tables that we find ourselves whenever we're together, whether it's in our roundtables or just informally supporting each other in our work. I'd like to pass over to Marcia for her greeting.
Thanks, Xavier. I was just, reflecting on what is the value that could hold us in this moment, hold the center of our time together. And collaboration came forth, collaboration with the community, collaboration with the government bodies, collaboration with each other. So collaboration sound okay? Everybody agree? Yeehaw. Okay, beautiful. Yes. Thank you. All righty. I'm gonna turn Sam. Xavier, does that make first step? Any announcements? I don't think.
I can't think of any announcements from my end. If anyone on the task force has something that they want to remind us of.
I have a quick announcement.
Okay.
There's a group called Hacking into History that is hosting a free virtual workshop tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. about racially restrictive clauses on property deeds and how that impacts racial inequity, gentrification, and the lack of affordable housing. And you can look them up through Hacking into History Durham.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's great. So with that, I'll turn it over to Samuel.
Sounds good. First, I'm going to pass it to Alec to kind of set the stage for the conversation. But just a brief comment to Manju's announcement. I've actually done some reading on some of the deed restrictions in Hope Valley. Very frightening stuff that we're doing back then, but and how it connects to today. But I'm passing it to Alec.
Cool. Hey, good evening, everyone. Good to see y'all. Happy Wednesday. Happy summer. So Samuel and I have been tasked with really just kind of opening up a question that we are going to kind of support facilitating around the question of whether or not it makes sense to open up another roundtable and what that roundtable could look like. The context for kind of initiating that conversation is that on behalf of the kind of SRO roundtable, our crew is slowly kind of wrapping up in terms of gathering the data. We have work to do in terms of analyzing the data and making recommendations, but we feel like we've mostly exhausted the folks that we want to hear from, that being kind of caregivers, students, educators, and principals. And so, there's been, again, we've kind of been tasked with opening up the conversation of whether or not it makes sense to shift some of our responsibility to thinking about another roundtable. I guess I'll prime the pump a little bit, but also do want to have just kind of an open conversation and see where folks' heads are at about the prospect of opening up another roundtable that is focusing on youth outside of the context of like the SRO, non-SRO school context, right? So kind of out of school young folks outside of the school context. So that is only one proposal that I'm aware of, but I think this is kind of an open conversation. Samuel, anything I'm forgetting? I know you had some things that you wanted to mention too, but anything I'm forgetting in regards to kind of setting the table a little bit?
Nothing really. I think one of the main things is I guess kind of group agreements before we go into the discussion. So we're having the idea of a couple of things, one being called step up, step back. So if you typically, take up the conversation space, try to, allow others who may not normally speak to have the opportunity to speak, as well as the rule of two. So try to allow two people to speak before you speak again, just to make sure the conversation is, moving to a lot of different mouths as opposed to being from like maybe 2 or 3 people. And then another thing is also just I guess for me as a young person to provide background for this. I mean, it's also important to not only think about the youth perspective in terms of SROs, but as we're trying to, expand this, view, this perspective on youth life, I think it's important to look at areas like mental health resources. That's something that I come across with when I'm talking to a lot of my friends and stuff like that, just outside of the school context. So making sure those support systems are, robust and that they're reliable, and also extracurricular programs. So it doesn't have to be school clubs. It can also be outside, sports groups like AAU basketball or really anything to that nature. Those things are really important. So those are just like other ways of thinking about this, as opposed to just, thinking about, what is youth life in the context of SROs or within the context of schools. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, and then I will add that I floated this question by Jesse this morning, and inevitably the question of timing and timeline came up, which is on our agenda for tonight. So I think it's impossible to have this conversation without thinking about, all right, where are we at and where are we going? So we'll try to, Samuel and I will do the best we can to kind of hold space for the question of timeline as we think about an additional roundtable. But other than that, we want to open it up. Xavier said we've got a good 20-25 minutes to have this conversation. So I can kind of keep stack just by way of people raising their hands in the little chat, and we'll just go from there. Jesse.
Yeah, I'll just add to Alex, since he mentioned our earlier conversation. My gut reaction was mixed. I think, having sat with it for the day, I'm supportive of the focus on youth, and can appreciate the possibility of that kind of focus. I think my main concern was what it would look like, wondering what it would look like to, in part, adapt the roundtables process in consideration of the timeline, since we're more than halfway through our process. And at this point, I'm less interested in extending our work, more interested in finishing our work within the time span that we have currently allotted. So I'd be supportive of a youth-focused roundtable that really thought critically about what they could do within, the next 6 to 9 months, in terms of listening and analyzing and recommending. But then also, I think I'd be mindful of how whatever that work would potentially be like a baton pass. I don't think that any of our work will end once our task force ends. In a lot of ways, we are continuing work that had begun before us, and people passed the baton to us. So I think I'm okay with there being a shift if we're mindful of that baton pass sort of strategically, and also if it's just energizing. I know this work has been tiring for some, and this might be a way to help people engage more meaningfully for the remaining month have. And if that feels strategic as well, then I can be supportive. So yeah, that's some of the thoughts. Comment.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Yeah, Marcia.
I just, when I think about, focusing on youth, with the two roundtables that I serve on, we're touching it. Like, for example, our next recommendation from the Criminal Legal System Roundtable, we're really looking at abuse, neglect, and dependency court. Boy, is that youth focused. The Office of Survivor Care we need to have a youth focus in that office, right? So when there is a violent incident in Durham, we are asking, were children exposed? Were youth exposed? What have we done to respond? How are we caring for youth when in crisis response, right? When people go to incidences of harm and crisis, being able to have not only the attention for children, but a response. I think that we should do that and also I know my friends on the roundtable of the violence interruption and de-escalation, Dr. Boone is totally committed to youth. I mean, so we've got people in that roundtable that bring an enormous amount, not to mention Samuel being a youth, a very mature youth. It's great. So I think there's places where I think it strengthens us all. I'd like to hear from, does that make sense for those other roundtable folks?
Marcia, you mean other criminal legal system roundtable people you're asking?
I was thinking
general?
like in general, the other roundtables, like, because we know we've got that, and then the survivor care, and also, I think the bail bond stuff. One of the questions we should be at, with Muffin's work, when you show up, if you're going to be in jail, do you have children? Are there children at home, for example? Are we going to be looking at truancy? What are the things, what's occurring that puts our children and youth at risk?
I'd agree. I'd just say, to Jesse's point, we've got so much we're already trying to cover on our roundtable that a dedicated roundtable on youth issues is exactly the kind of thing that could take up those youth-related issues that we're engaging, but do it more completely than we have the time to, so we can stay focused on the work we already want to get done in our lifespan. And they could take and run with those more youth-focused things that we've already encountered and come up with. And we can send them, ideas, and we can meet with them, and we can send them experts that we've engaged on those topics. But let a new roundtable focused on that take a kind of holistic look at youth wellness. And I would imagine other roundtables might have encountered similar issues that are kind of on the outstretch of their bandwidth to deal with everything else they're trying to accomplish within our time span.
Thanks, Mike. Manju?
I just wanted to lift up a conversation that keeps recurring for Durham Beyond Policing with parents who share that when they are trying to find help for their young people, they keep hearing from Durham City and Durham County sources that, like official sources within the system, that the only way for their child or youth to access resources is by catching a charge and getting caught up in the system. And so, and often when we're asked how we can, when we ask how we can be most supportive, we are referred to talk to folks who are deep behind several carceral layers. And and when we are looking at how folks are receiving resources to do youth work in Durham, it's like very piecemeal and very scattered and in very small amounts. So I'm really excited to hear the idea about a roundtable that would be proposing a real policy shift. I would hope towards something that's more supportive and preventative and helping all of Durham's children and youth be whole without ever having to encounter the court system or end up locked up.
Thanks, Manju. This is the thing when you implement the norm of step up, step.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Muffin.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I got a little background noise, but I think it would definitely be a good idea to focus on um, doing different things or getting different programs started for children and the youth. That's what I've been saying for a while now, is that we know that they're not going to not build a youth detention center, but if we can have programs in place where youth don't even have to go to that detention center, we can show them where it's a waste of that $56 million, because kids have something else to do and they have somewhere else to go. And that's the issue in Durham, is kids have nothing. It closed down, a lot of the Boys and Girls Clubs or after school programs, you have to pay. And so it becomes a financial strain on families and things like that. Those are the things that we should be trying to figure out what we can do as a task force to be able to get those programs funding to start them up, or the ones that have already been existed but we shut down because they didn't have the funding in the backing, making sure they have what they need to start them.
Thanks, Muffin. Jesse, go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Samuel.
I was motioning for Jesse.
Yeah. So I'm curious, it seems as though there's at least general support, or at least neutral support, because if you're not saying that no one's opposed, words. So I'm curious, among us, we aren't bringing on additional task force members. Are there folks that are interested in leaving their current roundtable to focus in on this work? Would it be in addition to the current roundtable that you're on? Xavier. Yeah, I'm just thinking about that in a sort of practical sense. I have another question too, but I'll just ask that if there's an immediate response.
Yeah, on that question, I was thinking more of if roundtables were in a position to wrap up their work within a month or two, and then turn their attention to broader youth. I wasn't thinking of anybody trying to do 2 roundtables or leaving one to go to another. I was thinking that if there were a youth roundtable that's coming up, it's coming out of what's currently the what we call the VIDE and the SRO, working together to figure out what type of youth roundtable that could be. That's just one idea, but I was definitely not thinking about, because our capacity is limited. So I definitely wasn't thinking about asking anyone to switch roundtables or add more work. That's just where I was coming from.
I guess in response to that, are there others who feel like they are at a concluding point within the next month or two with their roundtable?
Seems like no. Seems like no. Manju, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just, I wonder if this is a place where we could add some capacity by filling those 2 vacancies that happened when we lost our colleagues Tanya and Cynthia from these teams? Could we bring folks in who could help out with a new roundtable?
I did want to, first of all, thank Board Member Lewis for being here. This is July, the hiatus of most of our electeds, and she's taking time out to be with us. And I did see in their last monthly meeting in the end of June that she did bring it up to discuss replacing it. I'm not sure where that stands or if she'd like to speak to that. But I do appreciate your presence.
Thank you. So yeah, I did bring up in the June meeting, we had the application process open since April, maybe even before then, and just haven't gotten a lot of interest. We have 3 applications, and I just asked them to go ahead and move forward with that. So the board should be voting on who to bring on for that position in our next meeting. Whether they would have capacity or what that would look like, I think that would just be, the person who brought on and have that conversation with them, what that would look like. They are coming from a perspective of being either educator or staff at DPS. So they were really coming to give the perspective about SROs and what that looks like in the school system. So I'm not sure if the shift into focusing or just having roundtables with youth, it may or may not be, I guess it may even depend on who was selected, the 3 applicants. And that's online too. I put in the chat if you'd like me to, and you all can see who the applicants are.
I think the other thing that I'm mindful of as it relates to youth, lifting up the youth listening report, youth listening project, as a recent sort of body of work that again feels like a baton pass, and just wanting to consider like how that might be leveraged, and then adding in terms of capacity. I guess this goes with Manju's point. If there are people that folks have in mind who might be able to join that roundtable, as community members, so like they wouldn't necessarily have to get into the sort of bureaucratic nitty-gritty of applying and being appointed, because that takes time. It's a little less formal, but still meaningful if the right person can join that roundtable's work, as opposed to formally joining the task force. Though I get why that would be useful since there are open positions. Again, I just feel really sensitive about the time that we have, and I'm glad that we'll be able to talk more about that later. So.
I'm kind of wondering if I mean, I'm curious what the room thinks, but I'm wondering if that was actually a good segue into saying it sounds like there's consolidation around this roundtable. It sounds like there's a need for capacity, whether it be through kind of folks joining the roundtable or joining the task force, but a lot of that depends on kind of our overall timeline. I'm wondering if no one else has kind of thoughts around additional roundtables, or how to think more generally, more broadly about this particular one. I wonder if this is a good segue into kind of our timeline here from here going forward.
It may be helpful to look at that. Maybe we should table this discussion, move into the timetable discussion, and then pick it back up with a little more context, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, I don't want to close it. I don't want to close it just yet. If we could
Yeah,
table it,
yeah, for
that may be
sure.
helpful. Dwayne, okay, yeah. Okay. I'll share my screen here at this point. And Mike and I were tasked with looking at just outlining recommendation timelines. There were two things we're trying to get discussion on. One is what types of recommendations do you see this task force bringing forth when the work is said and done? And then I just want to just put in real terms what it looks like and how much time we really have left. So as far as types of recommendations, in small discussions I've had with some of you, I've heard policy recommendations, program or resources to existing programs. And then I added another word tonight that I heard from Jesse, the baton pass, where we can recommend, as many other task forces have done in the past, here's something that we see would be great for this community that's beyond the scope of this task force that we want to see someone else pick up. What would be an example of a policy recommendation? What might be an example? I'm just trying to make this clear. Get some clarity.
Well, like for example, the CLS roundtable will probably have some policy recommendations. Say, for instance, A&D court that Marcia mentioned. Policy for the court or child welfare, whatever, to implement in terms of the time for reunification notification. So it doesn't require more resources, but it's potential policy change, and that relates to a policy, different kinds of policy recommendations we might put forward as a task force or roundtables rather. There are some that are directed to this, probably pretty clearly directed to the city, some that are more clearly directed to the county commission, especially if those require resource expenditures, as we've already done some, and some that would be clearly directed towards the school board. Those are probably mostly, new programs and resources, like an Office of Survivor Care, for instance, or whatever it might be. But there could be policy changes that we might direct towards agencies kind of internally that don't even involve the city or the county or the school board. Like, for instance, I think what I learned from talking with Xavier was that the Crisis Intervention Roundtable, you all have already been in good discussion with Ryan in the Community Safety Department about things to do to implement as they're building their department. And those are kind of policy recommendations that they can just take and implement. They don't have to become a task force recommendation that gets approved by the city and all the way down the line. And we all might have versions of that. So those would be things I think we could still forge ahead with, and would be part of our final report, come April of next year, about this is everything we've accomplished. But they wouldn't necessarily be recommendations that a city or the county or the school board would have to have formally approved. And I know for our roundtable, there will also be policy recommendations as well as some programmatic recommendations that require resources that may be directed to a body other than those three, like the Administrative Office of the Courts, for instance, where that it's a recommendation we'll put forward. We may or may not want the city and the county to say, yes, we concur. We also endorse this recommendation, but it's really not up to any of those bodies to implement. It's up to some other body to implement. I suppose another policy recommendation could be one affecting state legislative change. Like, for instance, Marcia mentioned the bail bond issue, where we would suggest the state legislature ought to change the laws on bail and bonds related to cash bond, for instance. Or if we suggest that Durham should create a DUI court, there's going to be some potential state legislative change that would be involved. So that would be a policy recommendation that we'd put forward that isn't up to the city and the county, and the school board could endorse it, but it really doesn't involve them. It's something we would, suggest or baton passed for someone else to take up. And I suppose there's also, there's the question of recommendations that have programs and resources attached. And the question is, we learned from the reception for the prescriptions and repair proposal, do we need to expect that we have any recommendation that's going to cost any money do we have to present it to both the city and the county to, kick in their share, as was the nature of the commentary at that last meeting, that, will be, rather than us saying, this is a good idea, we think is going to cost some money you need to do, whether it's, related to SROs or crisis response or criminal legal system or violence or whatever. And then it's up to you, the elected officials, to figure out how to share the cost burden and where to find the money. It's not up to us to tell, it's up to us to tell you how much the total cost is. You guys figure out, where to get the money and who to ask for it amongst the three bodies or grants or whoever else. But that's something we, as a task force, I think we probably need some guidance on about how to proceed. So we don't have another instance where we put forward a proposal in good faith, asking one body for the money because that's where it makes most sense, and then telling us, well, why should we have to pay for it all? Why aren't you also asking the county to kick in?
Thank you. Any other types of recommendations that you may be thinking of that I don't have listed here? I hope this is somewhat clear. Seeing none.
What about, like Marcia had mentioned before, what about if we as a task force later go back, say, take another look at the racial equity task force recommendation, like the governor's ones, and say specifically the ones that involve local. We, the task force, support the following recommendations of this previous task force, and we think those should be implemented. That's sort of a baton pass, because it's up to the relevant local bodies who has yet to act on those recommendations to do so. Same thing might perhaps occur with the gang violence report / strategy document. There are things in there that could be worth us saying, yes, we think the local entities should act upon those. They wouldn't get any more specific than the bullet point items in those task forces, but we could just add our endorsement. And that probably would be something we would do, at the tail end of our work as part of our final report.
Absolutely. So we do want to make really clear that recommendations coming from your roundtables at this point can be in different formats. It may be a simple sentence of support that you bring to the full task force saying, we would like for this task force to support the work of this body. It could be just that simple. It would be on a list at the end of our report, and others would be much more fleshed out with budgets and who we spoke with and all the other things we've created in our document. So every recommendation does not have to be as robust as what we've brought forth so far. Some of them can be as simple as, we support this work. We would love to see this work continue. So with all that said, and we brought that up to say, okay, as you're thinking about your own roundtable's work moving forward and looking at the actual timeline, I'm not sure where this blank space came from, but as you were looking forward to your timeline, what do you think about what you have? Does anyone have any clear first and second reading timelines for any of the work you're doing now that you would like to talk about? Or if you want to mention the specific recommendation at this point, could you think about the times that you think you may wrap up some of the work you're doing? And that might help us figure out how we want to handle the youth roundtable.
My gut reaction, I don't think, yeah, I haven't, I'm talking a bit because I haven't chatted with Alex, Nori, or Tyler about this, but I don't imagine us having a first reading ready until September at the very earliest. Maybe October, but September, if we really get some good momentum and feel like we have clarity about a particular thing that we want to put forth. That's my gut reaction. So like September for a first reading, October for a second reading, but
I agree with that.
Are you guys comfortable with putting that down? Just, again, this is a worksheet. This is a worksheet. It is,
Right, that wasn't like a formal motion or anything that
there's
Alex
nothing,
seconded.
right. Look, I'm gonna make it really big.
No pressure.
On here, it's a worksheet. So just to help us all think through this, is it okay if I put that down?
You need the watermark that says draft.
Well, it's a live document. You can always change it.
Oh, it's very live. I think we talked about doing some type of graphic. I'm like, you know what? Nope. Let's just create it as we go. We got a little time here.
And I would say Xavier and Marcia and Muffin and Toya can correct me, but this is pretty much our timeline. We're hoping, shooting an R roundtable to wrap up our work by December. But I'm thinking similar to Jesse, we should be able to have a first reading proposal related to something, probably either, yeah, and I'll just say CLSRT, because I can think of 3 potential topics it might cover by September. And then we probably have another one in October and another one in November. In other words, we could probably have, one a month. And what were you, Xavier, when you and I were talking, you were thinking, given the amount of time that reading should take, we probably wouldn't want to try to consider more than like 3 proposals, unless they're really short, resolutions, not more than like 3 per meeting, right? Given the amount of time they need to be considered. And
that's my gut reaction
about that.
Okay. I'd love to hear others.
And you wanted, how much time do you want for us to roundtables to get the task force members and all the elected officials? Because that was something else you were saying. I think I was clear. You want to be able to share even the first draft of a proposal with all elected officials, not just our liaisons, but all of them, city council, county commission, school board members, correct? In advance of the first reading?
That's what my experience in this work over this first year has told me is going to be our best.
The longer you give it, the more.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to give them a chance to look through and
from its draft iteration through its final version.
Exactly. The draft iteration, yes, sir.
Got it. So that means at least a week before a task force meeting, right?
That's right.
Okay.
What about from our other 2 roundtables? Any idea where you might find yourself in this calendar? I did not mention all this shaded stuff at the bottom. I feel strongly that we should spend the last part of our prescripted time out in the public talking about this work. And so when I put final report in with a question mark, I don't mean publishing a final report, but having it ready to talk about. Or it may be publish it, but I just feel like if we do go all the way through April with recommendations, we'll have no steam, momentum. Yes, Jesse.
Would it make sense potentially to have the final report after the public campaign? I'm just thinking in terms of like some of that feedback. Like I would love to be able to have in our report that like we did an initial, like we did some initial campaigning engagement after we completed our analysis, and like people were able to say, wow, yeah, you heard me well. This is what I was hoping for. Or, ooh, I didn't expect you would do that. Or this isn't what we wanted off. Like, like that being, because I don't know. I wouldn't want to have a report and then and that not be captured if we're the community safety wellness like part feels important.
So that's what that would look like. Would that mean that the public campaign needs to start in January, or is 2 months sufficient for public campaign?
I could see, well, I'll be quiet. I'll let others share.
I really like that idea. I think that's really important that we have that draft, right? Take it to the people hear what folks feedback on that and then have a final report at the end of our tenure. Totally makes sense. And I think that we should, because as we're going along, we know what we're supporting, right? As we do these recommendations. So that looks like a good timeline for me. And then to get out into the community and do exactly what Jesse said. I think that's really, really good.
Could we not also do some of that public support behind recommendations that we've come up with, the task force has approved, and they've been put before the various bodies to receive whatever hearing or not they do, and we could be gathering press attention and public support behind those specific proposals that are coming up as we go along.
Absolutely.
Not just the whole package, but
Yeah.
specific ones.
Yes, that absolutely. That is.
They don't seem to have to be mutually exclusive is the point.
Absolutely. This is definitely not reflected in this chart, but anytime that you have a idea for recommendation, that public input and reflection is important. There's no reason to wait till February. The things you're thinking about in September between that first, second reading could be talked about and publicized. Absolutely. That absolutely can be ongoing. That's not reflected here. I'm glad you brought that up. Right? So yeah, and I like the idea of having a somewhat of a draft in January that we can talk about, and then based on our interactions, kind of tighten it up in it for April. That's what that would look like.
Yeah, I think for our roundtable, we're planning for the first reading of our recommendation to be during the August meeting for the task force.
And second reading the following month. That's them.
More than likely, or perhaps if we could schedule a time sometime during August, perhaps during then as well. Just depending on, time constraints, people's commitments, whether we'll be able to meet quorum or not. So
I see. But we can put it either way. I was reflecting in our weekly crisis response roundtable how collaborative things have been as far as being able to see some of the things we dreamed about actually taking place now through the department, community safety department, and being able to continually, give them feedback on what's happening. So a lot of what we had dreamed about happening is we're watching it take place in these pilots. Are there some additional ideas, concepts from the crisis response roundtable that you're thinking may come forth later? And if so, what months make sense? Again, this is just a draft. This is just a worksheet. This is just speculating. No pressure.
Speaking for myself, I find that kind of a hard question to answer because we're right in the middle of conversations about what comes next. I welcome other folks from my roundtable to speak up, but speaking for myself, I feel like we're in a modest holding pattern now that some of the pilots have launched, and that we're not expecting anything to go wrong, but we live in the same world as yesterday, so something will happen, right? And we anticipate that, or at least I anticipate that might, capture our attention.
Okay.
I'm not sure. We have talked about engagement and working with the department on community awareness and continuing some of our previous successful efforts and doing listening sessions and using things in that kind of tool belt to systematically and sufficiently create venues for community feedback. I don't know that we've settled on anything. I don't know, Manju, I think you're the other roundtable member on the call, at least that I see, if you have anything else to add.
Isak is here too.
Hi, Isak.
Nothing to add. I hear where you're coming from, Jim.
That's fair. That's fair. I couldn't see the chat when I was sharing. I did see where we possibly can do some other first and second readings later on, but
And if we have, if roundtables like crisis response have recommendations, it's more sort of internal ones that are going straight from your roundtable to a collaborative community partner. I personally certainly don't feel any need for the whole task force to approve of those. I would just want to make sure they're included in that
Right.
final report, again, to give full recognition of the work that we've all done. But everybody should have a chance to weigh in on that. If these are recommendations, coming from a part of a task force to some other entity, if you all feel, well, we want to know about those sooner rather than later. I personally don't feel the need to do that. I trust, our colleagues who are focused on those issues to do that. And
absolutely.
I'll learn about it later in the final report, or just, in announcements or whatever as we have meetings. Yeah, we've had this great idea. We sent it along to the DA and they're going to do it. Great. Or the Community Safety Department, and they've agreed to do it. Great. Doesn't need formal approval. But if other people think differently, we should know that.
So if we could pick back the concept of of additional youth work, seeing what we have here as a draft timeline, where might that a recommendation from that youth roundtable come in this timeline? I'll ask Alec and Sam to weigh in on that first. Does it seem like it still makes sense to do so?
I've unmuted my thing, but I don't necessarily I'm sitting with it. It seems like it's a tight timeline,
It does.
in all honesty, right? Which we knew was a strong possibility.
Exactly.
Yeah, I definitely think it would be a squeeze. And even if we don't even end up creating a full roundtable, perhaps it would just be a matter of, like Mike was recommending earlier, just consolidating a lot of our youth-related work into one space and just working collaboratively on that, to hopefully establish some cross roundtable collaboration there on that front.
Manju?
I'm basically echoing Samuel's idea, wondering about kind of some more compact ways of doing this, rather than doing a full roundtable process like the ones that we've done so far, really making the most of the work that came out of the Durham Office of Youth, and convening some cross roundtable work around these questions, and wonder about the possibility of hosting another like citywide, countywide town hall around key questions that folks are seeing around this work. What are we hearing on the ground people are hoping to see around youth, and letting that be the theme that brings folks together in the town hall.
Board Member Lewis?
This is really great discussion and options, and glad to hear that there's a special focus for the youth, and what does that look like for their safety and wellness as a community, not just related to the school. I know that this task force has engaged other community organizations to hear kind of what they've been doing, or to hear the communities that they've been involved with. And I'm wondering if you all will be open to and I guess it would sit mostly with the org coming together, protecting our dignity. That Adele Ortez has been doing these listening sessions, and I've seen some of these recommendations, and they're very much centered on youth, protecting our dignity. With youth, there may be something from those conversations that they could share with the group that they've had. I think they've been doing listening sessions for several months now. So I don't know if you've already engaged them or if that's an opportunity. And I know that they've been working with the Office on Youth as well. They've engaged youth to even name the paper, and they're coming to that conclusion at the, let's say the end of June, but we're already in July, so that might be have already concluded. So again, maybe listening to them and hearing from them, and then you all can decide, invite them into the space, and then you all can decide if this, how to add to that work or where you want to go with it. Thank you, Sam. I see your comments.
I just wanted to jump in super quickly and say, one, I agree that Pod would be a great resource. Being a part of that work, there's a lot of information there. I was just gonna propose a question. I like this idea of consolidating information that has already that's already existing, and I'm very much like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel if we don't need to. But is there anything that we might be missing, right? Like, I know there's a lot of different roundtables on here, and both the Youth Listening Project has a lot of recommendations, and so does Pod. But is there anything that we might need to consider? I know the Youth Listening Project doesn't. Yeah. So just wondering about that, and does that still push for the need of having this youth roundtable?
What I'm wrestling with is with these great ideas that we're hearing, somebody's got a bottom line to work. Somebody got to say, yes, I'm taking this. I'm taking these threads. I'm going to make some fabric, and I'm going to call on this and this and this person as needed. But what we're missing, if we don't have a youth roundtable, we are still missing a task force member who would bottom line that broader work in whatever format it takes, whether that's interacting with, protecting our dignity, whether it's asking and really working collaboratively with the other roundtables about, are there some youth-facing things that you're not able to deal with that we can look at? So I've got some hands up. Nori? Okay, he's put his hand down. Jesse?
Yeah, I think this is getting at the heart of what my initial concerns were. Because I try to be practical and concrete with these things. I'm like, who's going to do the work? Who's going to leave their roundtable and make space for a new roundtable? And practically speaking, I don't see any of us being able to do it today or next month or by the fall, which would mean a very short timeline. So I think while there's general support for focusing on youth, it doesn't seem strategic or realistic even to focus that or to make that focus within the context of a new roundtable. It just doesn't feel practical within the confines of this body and how it is structured. I think there are other bodies and offices that are doing really great work. I've gotten to observe and hear about Pod. I haven't been as connected with it just because I can't do everything. None of us can, but I know some of us are either directly or indirectly connected with people and orgs that are championing pod, along with other youth-focused efforts that I think relate to safety and wellness. And so perhaps this is an opportunity, since there seems to be some amount of youth relevance within our current roundtables, to be inviting community members to join us, and intentionally thinking about organizations that we could be amplifying or baton passing to when our work wraps up, so that that youth work doesn't fall through the cracks, at least as it relates to what we feel aligns with the work that we're currently doing. It's important enough for us to take time in a public meeting to mention it. So I'm certainly not here to disregard it at all, just because we may have limited capacity, or the structures that we're in sort of make it harder for us to spread ourselves more widely. But I'm okay with honoring our limits, right? Like, that's a part of what makes us effective, is like recognizing what we can't do, and trusting that like what we're doing is enough for the current season. So I'm not interested in seeing anyone bending over backwards and trying to do all things for all people. So yeah, I think it feels I'm more supportive in this moment of some intentionality around additional community members on our roundtables. And if that isn't already happening, or if that is already happening, intentional outreach and collaboration with other units that are in those lanes, and figuring out how we can support or amplify what they may already be doing that aligns with our focus on safety and wellness. That's my 2 cents on at least the first agenda item that we had. I know we left it open and moved on to other things, but we circled back. So that's kind of where I'm landing in this moment.
Thank you. Before I get to Mike, Muffin did put in the chat, is there a way for each roundtable to add a piece to include youth? And each roundtable has to answer that on their own, of course, but there's nothing stopping, if you have persons that you can bring into your roundtable that are not part of this task force, that those doors are still open. You can still recruit persons that are working in some of these other spaces into your roundtable spaces as well. That's just another option from a capacity standpoint to help you, to actually bottom line some of the work that you're doing. Just to say the SRO is already exploring bringing in more people. And so that's one way to add capacity within the restrictions that we have. Yes, Mike.
Well, perhaps I was thinking maybe there's a good compromise we could endeavor in the form of inviting these relevant youth-focused organizations and groups that are already doing the work to come to the task force and talk with us about the information they've gathered and the work they're trying to do. And we could have this conversation and pose this question to them, like, do you think an additional set of town halls on this topic at the end of the year, early in the year, would be useful? Or you think, we already know, we have enough voices, we know what to do, we just got to do it. And then have them, Jesse's point, inform us on whether they think those dots are, getting connected. I think it was Wanda, right? You shared that map with us months and months ago about all the various organizations and all the lines. Like, if there's, we get it. We're already trying to collaborate and knock down the stovepipes. And if that's happening, then we can leave that work, as Jesse says, in those capable hands, and perhaps have some baton passing recommendations at the end. Or if they come and meet with us in August or September at a task force meeting and say, we need help, we need to focus on this, then we could say, all right, well, that's something that we as a task force want to try to take on in our remaining months, is getting those conversations going. But they may already be, and they may want the task force to be a kind of supportive backbench partner in a minute, but we can focus, as Jesse says, on our other work in our remaining time. But why not hear from those folks doing the work at a task force meeting in the next couple of months, and then know how to proceed? And you just listed off so many people we could invite. I would probably think we should probably add Angela Nunn to that list, and whoever is on running the what is the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council, I think is what it's called in Durham. There's a state version of it and a local version of it.
Thank you. Wanda?
So I would like to say that I think that one of the best things that we could do in reference to other organizations that are working with youth, and I will say yes, as TRI does, is to acknowledge who they are and what they do in the community. So in terms of a town hall, I think it should be flipped on its head. And rather than, and not saying that it wasn't already flipped on its head, but to have individuals that have been working with youth, that have outcomes, that are experts in this area, to be the ones that are presenting at the town hall. Because if we, as the task force, in my opinion, come out, we want to help you, but we're not acknowledging the work, or, so I think that that should be the highlight, so that the community and whoever else can see the work that's being done, can hear the outcomes, maybe even hear from some of the youth that have been through the program. I think that that would be more effective, in my opinion, even in the space that we occupy, rather than sitting and listening yet again to what so-called experts are saying about the youth in Durham.
Malcolm, Sam, how you feeling about this discussion so far, where we are? There's a lot of options on the table.
A whole lot. I definitely agree with Dr. Boone's recent idea with regard to lifting up those voices and lifting up those organizations and groups that are providing that support. And in reference to, ideas of the roundtable being created, or ideas of just consolidating work, or ideas of trying to bring these other people aboard to provide their expertise in certain areas, in terms of like Ideal Ortiz. I think it's important for me to recognize that, whatever work is going forward, I would more than happily help in, whether it's captaining or whatever the term is for it. I would love to help in that work. I would love to help, coordinate those things, because I think a lot of those things are heavily related to what we're doing in the VIDE roundtable. I'm using the acronym VIDE, but yeah. So.
Can you remind us what VIDE stands for? Sorry. Violence Interrupters.
I always forget the I. I forget if it's intervention or interruption, but it's violence interruption / intervention and de-escalation.
Now, did you have any? Okay.
No, thanks.
Yeah, so it sounds like we have many options that we've all brought up. We can bring youth facing into our task force to present, as we've been doing in the past. We could actually do a town hall, a youth facing town hall with these groups presenting. We could expand the work in our roundtable by inviting persons who are, again, experts and deeply involved in this work into our work. We're gonna let that settle. We've put it out there. This is a workshop situation. We don't have to have this settled right now, okay? But Marsha and I meet with Dwayne Campbell every Tuesday morning. We'll take a look at what we've gotten here and really try to help bring more structure to it. But I just felt we needed to have this. We felt like we needed to have this conversation. Marsha, anything before we move on to the next agenda item? Any reflections?
Well, the only reflection that I have, that in the very beginning, when we all gathered, we knew that gun violence was a central thing, central problem in Durham. We knew that it's now the number one cause of death for children in our community. And we didn't want to have a roundtable because we recognized that it was touching all, kind of like youth, all the roundtables. So I just would like to say, however we want to develop this kind of cross roundtable in effort to address our youth, I invite people to do that with the issue and the problem and the solution of stopping gun violence in Durham.
Thank you. And before we move on and talk about including more community voices into these meetings, before we go to that concept with Marcia and Muffin, I do want to get a consensus. If you as a task force member believe that it may be helpful to bring more presentations. We were trying to cut back on presentations coming into this space. That's kind of why the next agenda item was thought about. But if now it seems like I'm hearing, well, we may want some more presentations if they're youth focused. So if you are amenable to, it's not a vote, it's consensus, like give me some sense of where we're going here. If you are amenable to having presentations in this space on second Wednesdays from some youth-facing organizations, please raise your hand if there's something that you have an appetite for. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I just wanted to lift up Manju's comment in the chat.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put words in Sam or Alex's mouth, because I heard Samuel say that he was willing to co-chair an effort, be it an actual new roundtable or something else. I think that was what I was asking earlier, and I didn't hear anyone say, I'll join the roundtable. I will leave my roundtable and join this new roundtable. No one said that, which is why I'm like, okay, make it make sense. So I don't hear that unanimous support based on that if. It's like it's the if. So I think just being clear and candid, like I'm trying to understand, is this in addition to, is this in place of, like just make it make sense. I know where I'm at. I'm in the SRO lane and that feels best for me. But if we have, I would think at least one, ideally two people that are willing to champion it and make it work within the time we have left, then I'll be supportive. So I just need to make it make sense.
And so
there's stuff happening in the chat.
There's a lot going on in chat. Sam is saying yes, indeed, he would do so in addition to his work with the Violence Interruption De-escalation Task Force. Jennifer says she'd be happy to support. And so is Dr. Boone, I believe. And so that may be a place to start for the three of you to kind of get together and think about what it may look like.
I'm not muted, sorry.
Yes. So yeah. So if the three of you would, Jennifer, Wanda, and Sam, to kind of get together and just say, what could this look like? What does this mean? What's realistic? And I did see maybe half of us saying, yeah, let's bring some more presentations in. Not quite sure how it feels yet. Jennifer?
Thank you. Sorry if I was unclear. I wanted to clarify. I don't actually think I'm a good fit for this particular committee or board, but I wanted to offer support, like should the people who elect to be on it actually be needed. But I am I'm an adult, and that's probably my qualification that I offer, but we have many other adults with much more experience and training with youth on the roundtable than me, so, or on the committee, excuse me.
But there's nothing wrong with having someone to assist with technical support, because many initiatives get launched with no technical support and fall flat on their faces. So I think I hear Jennifer saying that she's available to help with any research, outreach, collaboration, technical support type things as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
And Nori is in.
Nori's in as well. All right. So again, that's 4
Yes.
people.
Speaking on behalf of SRO Roundtable, like I feel, especially since we're thinking about adding at least 1, potentially 2 people to our roundtable,
Mhm.
like I am open to folks leaving our roundtable to focus on a youth thing. But I'm not here to volunteer Nori or Alec. I'm just trying to make it make sense, y'all. So.
So Alex is there. So I'm gonna step back. We're gonna close this out and let those persons kind of talk about what feels great to them. We do have 15 minutes left, a little over 15 minutes left. And I want to make sure that Marsha and Muffin have some time to talk about theirs. So thank you for this great discussion.
I'm gonna take longer than 15 minutes. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. But I think we've landed in a good place. I think we can let that group do an informal subcommittee work without being a subcommittee, and help guide us to the end of the year as far as how we look at non-school based youth or non-SRO based youth issues. So thank you again, Marsha, Muffin. The floor is yours.
Thanks. I'll pass it.
Okay, so Marsha, you asked the question and I'm gonna answer it.
Beautiful. And the question is, one of the things about this task force that I think is so rich is our connection and our ability to listen and our desire to listen and to bring back voices that don't often get heard. And to bring that to us, that's the treasure. And so Mom and I were talking about just how to do that instead of getting professionals to come and speak to us about different things, that how can this task force be a link, be a way for regular voices, our neighbors, to be heard on critical issues that we're dealing with. So, and we've had different ideas. And so the question, Muffin, is how do we bring those authentic voices that are being deeply affected by either the lack of policy or policies that may need change?
Okay, thank you, Marsha, for asking that question. What I was discussing with you earlier is we can have more community voices, but we say that we're in community, but we're not really in community, because we're not really on the streets. We're not like in the places. It's very rare that I meet strangers, because no matter where I am, I wind up striking up conversations with people, and we be having these really good conversations, and that's where I get a lot of my knowledge from. Is from having conversations in the grocery store, at the courthouse, at the car deal, not even the car dealership, the rental car place, but just all these places. People, ask me about my shirts, and I have these conversations, and I listen to what they say. And sometimes when I'm telling y'all stuff and I'm being really raw and aggressive with it, that's how they give it to me. They don't sugarcoat it. They give it to me exactly how I give it to y'all, because that's what they want people to know. When I invite people to speak, I tell them, I'm not going to bridle your tongue. I'm going to let you say whatever it is you want to say, because people really need to hear what you have to say from you as a formerly incarcerated man or formerly incarcerated woman. They need to hear it how you feel it. And so I think we can invite people in, but when we invite them in, we have to listen. Like with Miss Marion, when she joined the roundtable, of course, on the opposite ends of what we want to see about incarceration, right? But I respect her and I allowed her to tell me exactly how she felt about me saying I wanted, people to be free to commit, acts of harm against folks. And she said that, she wanted them locked up, right? She's like, I don't feel that way. I want them locked up. And I respect her enough to listen to her and understand her and not try to push my agenda off on her. And we can do that too as a roundtable. We have to make sure that we're not pushing our personal agendas off on individuals because they don't agree with us. And being out in the community and being with different elected officials, the task force is kind of losing, like we don't have any teeth right now. Like, even though we're a year old, we still haven't cut any, our teeth still haven't come in, right? That's how I'm using the analogy. We're still a baby and our teeth haven't come in. So people are not really taking us as serious as we should be because all they see is we're being aggressive, right? And that's what was said at the city council, right? Oh, you're a bunch of activists, so yeah, you're not gonna, but that's not the case. We all have experience and knowledge that can help folks. But if we're not sharing that knowledge with people who have the same goal as us and we're not allowing them to speak and we're the only ones speaking, they're going to always look at us that way. But we know that there's a whole community of folks that agree with there should be something else other than, where's Dwayne at? Is he on the call still? There's
Yes,
others.
absolutely.
There's others who think that we should not have police. And and then there are people who say that we need less police, right? But does that make them any more less valuable if they say that we need more police? No, that doesn't make them any less valuable to me, even though I disagree. So we can get them in, but we have to talk to the people. And we have to go outside of our comfort zone. We have to go outside of our comfort zone and talk to people, even though it may feel uncomfortable for us. You would be surprised at how many people want to be engaged with us, but they haven't heard of us before, and no one's talked to them about the community wellness task force. When I tell people, "Oh yeah, I'm on the community wellness task force," I'm like, "What's that? When did they get this?" And it snowballed into a bigger conversation that they were unaware of. So if y'all can do that, if you can.
Are you there, Muffin?
Not everybody knows about this.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna shut up now because I'm gonna start to ramble.
You're great. Thank you. And so as we do recommendations, I would love to have just a conversation about other people, to think about people that we know that we should be hearing from. And I just would like to open that up to ideas here. How may we seek out, listen deeply without judgment, and then share the wisdom of this community? Any thoughts on that? Mike?
I think, well, 2 points. One, Muffin, you're in explaining the hopefully self-evident rationale for this because it makes us better informed to make better proposals. As you were saying, it lets the community know more about what we're about, which connects directly to what Xavier was talking about earlier in trying to let our work be known and supported and build up public support for what we're doing before we're done. So it's mutually beneficial. A practical point, Marcia, you had mentioned, Muffin's great idea, and just with the pragmatic alteration that if individuals weren't comfortable coming to a task force meeting on Zoom, I hope they would, because I think we would benefit from seeing people, hearing from, being able to listen to them first, second, third, but then ask questions to amplify what they're saying. But if they would rather have their input be given to us via a roundtable like the crisis intervention did with their great town hall, we got lots of distilled information from community voices about what they saw a safe Durham being without directly coming to the roundtable. So I think both, we can have, I hope we can have people willing to come and talk to us about an issue that relates to a proposal we're developing as we all consider it. But also other ways that those community voices can find their way to us for people who just don't feel comfortable in this space. Although hopefully we can make them comfortable when we invite them to assure them the kind of space they're coming into.
Thank you. Yeah. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Any comments, folks? Do you like this idea, instead of having that our orientation now is the expertise of lived experience as opposed to positions of professional positions? Great. Okay, good.
How should we practically accomplish that, Martha and Xavier? If we, as roundtable members or folk, have somebody we think we really should hear from, should we be letting you two know and or Dwayne know? Like, yeah, let's get them on the schedule for X, a task force meeting, so it can be part of the agenda, so we make sure we make space, so we don't have 5 guests one month and none the next.
Right.
Kind of similar to the timeline you were making for proposal consideration. How should we accomplish
Yeah.
this?
Xavier,
For the August meeting, for the September, October, November meeting.
Yeah.
When I was saying as far as inviting more people in, I wasn't saying to like invite people in to put them on display.
Right.
As more to say they can come in and listen to what we have going on. What we invite them to a roundtable first, and then invite them to the big meeting, later. That way they can see what we're doing, and if they want to, put any input in, they can, as opposed to saying, "Hey, we want to put you on the agenda." And
right.
we're just inviting folks in.
Oh, okay. Because then they just come if they want to come. We don't need prior planning or anything like that. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. That makes sense.
So for me, this is about relationships, and just as Muffin was talking about in her daily life, whether it's a grocery store or whether she is wherever she is, responding to questions and answering questions in an authentic, compassionate, humble, we are here in this life and space together kind of way, to me is like primary to inviting somebody to the task force. Yeah, and I'll just leave that alone because I could go places with that. So.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Jesse
I have-
said.
Oh, Jesse, thanks.
I'll do my best to be brief. Admittedly, this feels a bit unformed. So please bear with me. I think what I'm hearing Muffin lift up feels most resonant when we are hearing community voices that are different. We hear people offer their lived experience, personal expertise, and it is not only different than ours, but in conflict with our end goal or strategy. I don't think we necessarily, sometimes I see people making folks enemies, and sometimes I think people just are wanting to argue their point or get their point across. And I think where it feels most strategic is like being okay, learning how to be okay with someone seeing something differently and figuring out how to, and I'll use this word very intentionally because Dr. Wanda just mentioned it, how to actually build relationship with people and move them along in a way that is based in, again, real relationship. And that doesn't happen in one conversation. I think oftentimes when someone disagrees with us, we're just like, okay, well, I don't need to engage them more. I'm going to talk with folks that agree with me. And I think to Muffin's point, like there are folks that are going to keep it extra real with us and tell us what they, and we have to, you know, I think it's our opportunity to really hear them out and be okay if they are saying something that isn't exactly what we want to hear or expected to hear. I know that's been the case within our roundtable work. And I'm hopeful that the recommendations we make invite people into real relationship and move people along so that we can actually do what we talk about doing, but I think fall short. And it's okay to fall short. We're human, we're imperfect. But it's about being honest enough to name the ways that we fall short and are imperfect and can do better together, ideally. So I think I really appreciate this moment to acknowledge that there are many voices in our community that care about social justice, that care about equity, but we have different ideas of what that is. And we have to figure out how to move people along, and doesn't make us less legitimate or less committed to justice work, abolition, whatever the words you want to use. It just means we're committed into it for the long haul. And again, that's what I said earlier, this work goes far beyond the 2 years or so for this task force, and figuring out how to operate sustainably matters. And a part of that sustainability, I think, again, is being grounded in real relationship. And so if we really care about people and want to uplift their human experience, we have to be curious enough to wonder, well, why do they want more police, and not just write them off? And if people have that assumption that we're writing them off, we have to be honest about the ways that we might be confirming that bias, whether we intend to or not, and check ourselves. So I'm open to those conversations if people feel like I need to be corrected. Like I said, we're not perfect, and there's always room to grow. And I hope fellow task force members will keep that same kind of open, transparent posture so that we can do this work well, within the binds of the task force and beyond, as we continue advocating for wellness and safety in Durham. So that's me. I know that was a little long because I think talk can't be brief, but that's what I'm hearing you say, Muffin.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Yes. And it was beautiful.
Stated.
Say that again, dear. Muffin, I didn't hear you.
Oh no, I was just saying, yes, Jesse, that was beautifully stated.
Yeah, we're at time, and I think that was a beautiful summary of what we're doing. If we can all be listeners like that, that's what makes a city of peace. So thank you. And Xavier, do you have any closing comments, or since we are at time, can I just leave with the word of gratitude? Wanda, did you want to say something? Okay. Well, thank you all, and I leave this meeting with lots of gratitude and respect for y'all. So thank you, and onward together. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Y'all have a good one.